My name is Ava Reynolds, and at 25, I never imagined I would be standing in a luxury bridal suite watching my wedding dress burn. Flames crawled hungrily up the ivory satin, the fabric I had waited 6 months to see finished, now curling into blackened, melting ruin at my feet. The smell of smoke filled the air, sharp and choking, mixing with the faint scent of roses from the massive bouquet resting on the vanity. Standing in front of me, lighter still clenched in her perfectly manicured hand, was my soon-to-be mother-in-law, Victoria Harrington. Her eyes were wild with triumph. "Now you can't marry my son," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury and satisfaction. "Ethan needs a woman from our social circle. Not some girl from the wrong side of town pretending she belongs in our world." She tossed her designer handbag over her shoulder, as if she had merely spilled a drink, not committed an act of pure sabotage. My 3 bridesmaids stood frozen in their lavender gowns, unable to move, unable to speak, staring at the smoldering remains of what had once been my dream. I forced myself to breathe. "Mrs. Harrington," I said quietly, reaching for my phone, "you have no idea what you just did." She laughed, a brittle, sharp sound. "I saved my son from the biggest mistake of his life. A community college degree and a job at a small advertising firm don't make you fit to be a Harrington. Ethan belongs with someone like Sabrina Cole. Her father owns half of downtown. That's the kind of family we associate with." I pressed a single button on my screen. Behind her, the massive mirror reflected not only the smoke-filled room, but the growing panic on her face, as she noticed the tiny red dot glowing on my phone. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Live streaming," I replied calmly. "For Ethan's grandparents in Florida. For my brother overseas. For every guest already seated in the ceremony hall." Her smile faltered. Jessica, my maid of honor, rushed to open the window, letting in cold spring air as smoke rolled out into the sky. The room was silent except for the crackle of dying flames. "The wedding is off," Victoria said sharply, trying to regain control. "I'll tell everyone you panicked. Ethan will be upset, but he'll recover." "Are you sure about that?" I asked, turning the phone toward her. On the screen, the entire ceremony space was visible, rows of white chairs, the flower-covered arch, and a giant projection screen now displaying this very room. Her face. The lighter. The burning dress. Her words. Her skin drained of color. "Turn it off," she whispered, lunging toward me. Jessica stepped between us. "Everyone just watched you set a bride's dress on fire and insult her on camera. You might want to think carefully about your next move." My phone buzzed again and again with incoming messages. One name stood out. "Ethan is on his way." Victoria's confident posture crumbled. She looked around the room as if searching for an escape, her voice suddenly thin. "This isn't what it looks like. I was just testing the fabric. Wedding dresses are supposed to be flame-resistant." Through the live feed, I could hear murmurs spreading through the guests. The camera angle shifted. Someone had taken control of the broadcast. Ethan was no longer standing at the altar. He was running. The door to the bridal suite burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Ethan Harrington stood there in his tuxedo, chest rising and falling, his eyes darting from my face to the smoking remains of my wedding dress on the floor, and finally to his mother. Behind him, his father, Robert Harrington, and the venue manager hovered in stunned silence. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice dangerously calm, "tell me I didn't just watch you set Ava's wedding dress on fire while telling the entire guest list she isn't good enough for our family." Victoria's expression shifted instantly from panic to practiced victimhood. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. I was protecting you. This girl has been after your money from the beginning. I was only testing her reaction, testing her character." "Stop," Ethan cut her off. His voice cracked with emotion. "Just stop lying. I heard everything. Everyone heard everything." He turned to me, his eyes softening, filled with apology and disbelief. "Ava, I am so sorry. I swear, I had no idea she would ever do something this cruel. I carefully stepped around the blackened remains of the gown, each step feeling heavier than the last. "It's just a dress," I said quietly, though we both knew it wasn't. It was 6 months of dreams, of planning, of imagining this moment. But what your mother just showed the world, that wasn't about fabric. That was about how she sees me. How she sees us. Ethan took my hands. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "It's your call." Before I could answer, Robert stepped forward, his face pale with controlled anger. "Victoria," he said in a low voice, "what have you done?" She turned to him desperately. "Richard, please. You know the Cole family would be a far better match. Their name, their status, this girl doesn't belong in our world." Robert shook his head slowly. "Ava built her life through hard work and determination. And today, you destroyed something precious because of your pride. You've gone too far." My phone kept buzzing with messages from guests watching the live stream. The venue coordinator approached hesitantly. "Miss Reynolds, the guests are asking what's happening. Should we make an announcement?" I looked at the ashes on the floor, then at my bridesmaids, who were still standing in shock, and finally at Ethan, who hadn't let go of my hands. A strange calm settled over me. "The ceremony is still happening," I said firmly. "Just differently." Victoria let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "In what?" "Your underwear." "In my backup dress," I replied. The room fell silent. Ethan blinked. "You have a backup dress." I didn't, at least not officially. But months of working in advertising had taught me one thing: always have a contingency plan. "Rachel," I said, turning to one of my bridesmaids, "remember the bridal shoot we did last month for Cleveland Bride magazine? Call Sophie Lane. Ask if her sample gown is still available." Rachel's eyes widened with understanding. "The ivory sheath with the lace overlay. It would fit you perfectly." Robert pulled out his phone. "I'll have the driver pick it up immediately." As arrangements were made, I turned back to Victoria, who now stood in stunned silence. "You thought burning a dress would stop this wedding," I said softly. "After everything Ethan and I have been through." "But everyone is watching," she hissed. "Yes," I replied, meeting her eyes. "And now they'll also see what happens next." I faced the camera, knowing hundreds of guests, and thousands online, were still watching. "Thank you for your patience," I said calmly. "The ceremony will be slightly delayed. But love always finds a way, even when someone tries to burn it down." From the phone speakers, applause and cheers erupted. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Mom, you need to leave. You're no longer welcome here." Her face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You would choose her over your own mother? After what you did today?" Ethan said steadily. "Yes." Without hesitation. Security gently but firmly escorted Victoria out of the suite, her protests echoing down the hallway as the door finally closed behind her. And for the first time since the flames had touched my dress, I felt something stronger than shock or heartbreak. I felt unbreakable. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of motion and determination. The bridal suite, once heavy with smoke and tension, transformed into a command center. Stylists, bridesmaids, the venue coordinator, and even a few female guests who had rushed in to help moved with purpose. Pins, needles, steamers, and fabric swatches appeared as if by magic. Then the door opened again. Sophie Lane, the boutique owner from Cleveland Bride, entered with a garment bag in each hand, and a third slung over her assistant's shoulder. "I brought options," she said breathlessly. "Just in case." My bridesmaids gasped as she unzipped the first bag, revealing an elegant ivory sheath, with a delicate lace overlay that shimmered softly under the sweet lights. "That's the one," Jessica whispered. "It's perfect." Within minutes, the venue seamstress was working miracles, adjusting the dress to my frame with swift, confident movements. Safety pins flashed, scissors snipped, and thread flew as the gown was shaped to me, as if it had been made for this very moment. Meanwhile, through my phone's live stream, I could hear Ethan's voice echoing from the ceremony space. He had returned to the altar and was now addressing the guests directly. "Today didn't start the way any of us expected," he said, steady and sincere. "But Ava and I believe that it's not perfect circumstances that make a marriage strong. It's how two people face the imperfect ones, together." Applause thundered through the speakers. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound steady my racing heart. "Okay," Melody said, settling a borrowed veil into my hair. "Take a look." I stepped in front of the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different from the bride I had imagined months ago. The dress was simpler, more refined, less dramatic than the original. But it fit me perfectly. It looked resilient. Like someone who had been tested and hadn't broken. Robert knocked gently before entering. When he saw me, his eyes softened. "You look beautiful, Ava. I'm so sorry for what Victoria did. Her behavior was inexcusable." "You don't have to apologize for her," I said quietly. "You didn't like the match." He nodded, emotion flickering across his face. "Ethan is ready whenever you are. Anne, your boss is here. He says this is the most powerful real-life marketing story he's ever seen." I couldn't help but laugh. Even now, Mark, my ever-opportunistic creative director, was thinking in headlines. The venue coordinator stepped in. "Miss Reynolds, the guests are waiting. The musicians are ready. The live stream is still running." An idea sparked in my mind. "Can we keep the stream on while we walk from here to the ceremony hall?" I asked. "Let them see the whole journey." She smiled. "Of course." Minutes later, my bridesmaids and I began walking through the garden corridor that led to the ceremony space. Cameras followed. Guests watched on the massive screen as we moved, not in silence, but to rising applause. It wasn't the entrance I had planned. It was stronger. As the doors opened, I saw Ethan waiting just inside, his face lighting up the moment he spotted me. "Ready?" he asked softly, taking my hand. "More than ever," I replied. The music swelled. Guests rose to their feet, not in hushed reverence, but in open, supportive applause. It felt less like a performance and more like a victory march. We walked forward together, not just toward an altar, but toward a future that had already proven itself unshakable. The ceremony that followed was nothing like the one we had rehearsed for months, yet it felt more real than anything we could have planned. As I walked down the aisle in the borrowed ivory gown, the guests didn't remain silent as tradition demanded. They stood, clapping, some even wiping tears from their eyes. It wasn't just happiness on their faces, it was respect. Solidarity. The kind of emotion that comes from witnessing something survive an attempt to destroy it. Ethan waited for me at the altar, his posture straight, his eyes fixed only on me. For a brief second, I noticed the empty seat in the front row where Victoria should have been. Beside it sat Robert, his expression solemn yet proud, as if he were silently promising that what had happened would never be allowed to happen again. Our officiant, Pastor Reynolds, cleared his throat, emotion evident in his voice. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today not only to witness a wedding, but to witness the triumph of love over adversity. Ava and Ethan have already faced their first great challenge as a couple, and they have met it with grace, courage, and unwavering commitment to one another. When it came time for our vows, Ethan surprised me. I promise," he said, his voice carrying through the hall and into the live stream, "to stand by you against anyone who tries to come between us. No matter who they are. No matter what title they hold in my life. You are my family now. You are my choice. Always." Tears blurred my vision as I spoke my own vows, promising partnership, loyalty, and a future built on respect rather than approval. Then, just as we reached for the rings, a flicker of panic crossed Ethan's face. "The rings," he whispered. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew Victoria had been holding them earlier. Before the moment could falter, Robert stepped forward calmly, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. "I thought it would be wise to retrieve these," he said quietly. "Just in case." Relief washed over us as the rings slid onto our fingers, sealing promises that now felt stronger for having been tested. When Pastor Reynolds finally declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the room erupted. Cheers, applause, even a few joyful shouts echoed beneath the high ceilings of the grand pavilion. As we walked back down the aisle, I spotted Mark standing near the side, discreetly filming, his eyes shining with emotion. He gave me a thumbs up that somehow managed to be both professional and deeply personal. The reception that followed was unlike any elegant, carefully scripted wedding I had ever attended. There was laughter that sounded freer, conversations that felt more genuine. The air carried not just celebration, but defiance, a shared understanding that something ugly had been confronted and overcome. Someone had already created a custom social media filter, a phoenix rising from flames, with our names beneath it. "Our wedding is trending," Jessica whispered excitedly. "People are calling it the Phoenix wedding." Ethan's old college friend, Andrew, who worked in public relations, approached with his phone. "Local news wants a statement. They are calling this the most resilient wedding Cleveland has seen." Ethan smiled, his arm secure around my waist. "Tell them love isn't about perfect families. It's about choosing each other when things get messy." As the evening went on, I noticed Robert speaking quietly but firmly with various relatives, his body language making it clear that lines had been drawn and boundaries set. For the first time, I saw him not as the silent partner in Victoria's shadow, but as the true backbone of the family. Later, his sister, Laura, leaned toward us. "Richard told Margaret that after today, she's the one who needs to worry about her place in the family business if she refuses to get help." Ethan exhaled slowly. It took 27 years, but he finally stood up to her. During our first dance, I glanced around the ballroom. Many of Victoria's society friends were gone, their reserved tables empty. In their place stood my co-workers, my friends, people who had rushed forward without hesitation when things went wrong. It felt like a quiet shift of power. And I realized something profound. The fire that was meant to humiliate me had, instead, burned away every illusion, leaving only truth, loyalty, and the unbreakable core of what Ethan and I had chosen to build together. As the reception continued, the atmosphere in the ballroom kept changing in subtle but powerful ways. At first, there had been shock and whispers. Then excitement. Now there was something deeper, an unspoken sense of unity, as if everyone present had become part of a story bigger than a simple wedding. The music played, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air, but beneath it all was the knowledge that we had just witnessed a line being crossed, and a stand being taken. Ethan's father, Robert, moved from table to table with quiet authority, thanking guests for staying, reassuring relatives, and gently but firmly making it clear that what had happened would not be brushed aside or explained away. I watched him from across the room, seeing a man, who had clearly spent years keeping the peace, now finally choosing truth over comfort. My boss, Mark, joined us near the cake table, still holding his phone. "You two have no idea what you've started," he said, half in awe, half in professional excitement. "The live stream clip is spreading fast. People aren't just reacting to the drama, they are reacting to the message. Standing up to toxic behavior. Choosing love over status. This is powerful." Ethan smiled politely. "We didn't plan to make a statement. We just refused to let someone destroy our day." "Sometimes," Mark replied, "the most powerful statements are the unplanned ones." Not long after, Ethan's cousin Olivia approached our table. Her expression was serious, almost emotional. "I want you to know," she said softly, "most of the family doesn't agree with what Aunt Victoria did. She's controlled everything for years, and people were afraid to challenge her. Today, you did." Her words meant more than she probably realized. Later in the evening, as we slipped away for a few quiet minutes on the terrace outside the ballroom, Ethan's phone buzzed. He read the message, his jaw tightening slightly before he exhaled. "It's from Dad," he said. "Mom has locked herself in the guest house. She's demanding I choose between her and you." Dad told her that after what she did today, the choice was already clear. I searched his face, worried I might see doubt or guilt. Instead, I saw calm determination. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Relieved," he admitted. 4 years I watched her control everyone, Dad, the family, even me. Today she finally showed her true face in front of everyone. It's painful, but it's also freeing. We went back inside to find the photographer waiting. She hesitated before speaking. Some guests captured photos and short videos of the incident earlier. "Would you like me to ask them not to share?" Ethan looked at me, silently asking what I wanted. I thought of the burning dress. The lighter. The words spoken without shame. Then I thought of the applause, the support, the way people had rallied around us. "No," I said gently. "This is part of our story now. Not the part we dreamed of, but the part that shows who we are." As if to confirm that decision, my phone buzzed with a notification. A local news page had already posted a short clip of the live stream. Thousands of views. Hundreds of comments. Strangers writing messages of support, sharing their own stories of difficult in-laws, controlling parents, and the courage it took to draw boundaries. Ethan read over my shoulder and shook his head in disbelief. All because someone tried to burn a dress. "Not just a dress," I replied quietly. "Because someone tried to burn a future." The rest of the night unfolded with an almost surreal beauty. Our first dance felt less like a performance and more like a promise. Speeches were no longer just about romance, they were about resilience, respect, and choosing each other when things get hard. When we finally left the venue, the cheers followed us all the way to the car. As the doors closed and the noise faded, Ethan took my hand and kissed it softly. "We didn't just get married today," he said. "We proved something." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the image of flames now replaced by something stronger. "We proved," I whispered, "that love doesn't break when it's tested. It reveals what's unbreakable." 1 week later, Ethan and I were sitting on the wooden deck of our private villa in the Maldives, the endless blue ocean stretching out before us like a promise of peace after chaos. The sound of waves was gentle, steady, nothing like the storm our wedding day had become. Yet even here, far from Cleveland, far from society expectations and burning dresses, the impact of what had happened was still unfolding. Ethan scrolled through his phone, then let out a slow breath. "Dad says Mom is staying with her sister in Cincinnati for now," he told me. "She's telling everyone she was testing the fabric, and that things got misunderstood." I raised an eyebrow. Hard to misunderstand someone shouting, "You can't marry my son," while holding a lighter. He chuckled softly, then grew serious. "She's finally agreed to see a therapist. Dad told her there will be no reconciliation, no business involvement, nothing, unless she takes responsibility for what she did." I reached for his hand. "That must be hard, even after everything." "It is," he admitted. "But it's also necessary. She's crossed lines for years. This time, she crossed them in front of the whole world. Because it wasn't just our families who had seen it. The video had spread. What began as a shocking wedding disaster had turned into something much bigger. Local news channels picked it up. Then national blogs. Then women's magazines. The story wasn't about luxury or scandal anymore, it was about toxic control, boundaries, and choosing your partner over pressure. My boss, Mark, messaged me that the agency had received new clients who specifically mentioned our Phoenix wedding as the reason they trusted us with crisis campaigns. One brand even wanted a full documentary-style ad about resilience, inspired by our story. "They are calling you the woman who refused to let anyone burn her future," he wrote. I smiled, setting my phone down. Not exactly how I imagined starting married life. Ethan brushed his thumb over my wedding ring. But exactly how we'll live it. Honest. Strong. United. 3 months later, we returned to Cleveland for the annual Harrington Family Foundation Gala. For the first time in years, the event wasn't being run by Victoria. Robert had taken full control. As our car pulled up to the Cleveland Art Museum, where the gala was being held, I felt a flutter of nerves. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked. "A little," I admitted. "Your mother won't be there, will she?" "No," he said. "Not this year. This is Dad's night." Inside, the atmosphere was completely different from what Ethan had described from past events. Gone was the cold, rigid formality. In its place was warmth, genuine smiles, and a sense of purpose. Robert greeted us at the entrance, his face lighting up. "There you are," he said, pulling us into a warm embrace. "The couple who inspired a new chapter for this family." He led us toward a large display near the center of the hall. A redesigned foundation logo shimmered above it, a phoenix rising from subtle flames. Introducing the Rising Phoenix Grant, Robert explained proudly. Support for women rebuilding their lives after toxic relationships, family rejection, or sudden loss. Your wedding opened a lot of eyes. Including mine. My throat tightened. One of the grant recipients, a young woman with determined eyes, approached me later. "Your story gave me the courage to leave my abusive marriage," she said quietly. "Now I'm starting my own business. Thank you for standing up." In that moment, I understood something deeply. What Victoria had tried to destroy had become a spark. Not of scandal, but of change. That night, standing beside Ethan under the museum's glowing lights, I felt stronger than I ever had in my life. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. We had faced fire. And we had not burned. We had risen. Later that evening, after the gala had begun to wind down, Ethan and I stepped out onto the quiet terrace of the Cleveland Art Museum. The city lights shimmered below us, reflecting off the glass and marble, and for the first time in months, everything felt settled. Not perfect. But honest. Ethan's phone vibrated in his hand. He read the message slowly, then looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "She's coming back to Cleveland," he said. My heart skipped. "Your mother?" He nodded. "Dad says she's agreed to counseling. Real counseling. Not just for appearances. He told her if she wants any chance of being part of our lives again, she has to take responsibility for what she did and for how she's treated people for years." I exhaled, not in fear, but in cautious relief. "How do you feel about that?" Ethan took my hands in his. "Whatever happens with her, we face it together. The same way we faced everything on our wedding day." I smiled softly. Together. In the months that followed, life slowly found its rhythm again. Work became busy in the best way. The advertising agency launched a campaign inspired by resilience and crisis recovery, unofficially nicknamed the Phoenix Project. Clients came in not because of scandal, but because they trusted a team that knew how to stay calm when everything went wrong. Our story was still shared, still talked about, but now it carried a different tone. It wasn't about a cruel mother-in-law anymore. It was about boundaries. About choosing your partner. About not allowing love to be controlled by fear, status, or manipulation. Victoria kept her distance at first. Therapy, according to Robert, was not easy for her. For the first time in her life, she was being forced to confront the damage she had caused rather than hide it behind social standing and control. One afternoon, months later, a letter arrived at our home. Not an email. Not a message through someone else. A handwritten letter. Ethan opened it in silence and read it twice before handing it to me. The words were stiff, careful, but unmistakably sincere. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't rewrite the story. She simply said she was sorry. Sorry for the fire. Sorry for the humiliation. Sorry for trying to decide her son's life for him. She ended the letter with one line that made my chest tighten. I don't know if you will ever forgive me. But I finally understand that love is not something you control. It is something you respect. Ethan folded the letter and held it quietly. I never thought I'd see this day. Do you want to see her? I asked gently. Not yet, he said honestly. But someday. When trust can exist again. And I knew that was enough. On our first wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised me. He took me back to the grand pavilion. Not inside. Not to the ballroom. But to the garden path where we had walked while the cameras rolled, while the guests waited, while the world watched us refuse to be broken. In the center of the garden stood a small bronze sculpture. A phoenix. At its base was a simple plaque, from ashes, truth. From truth, strength. From strength, unbreakable love. My name is Ava Reynolds, I whispered softly, the words that had begun this whole story echoing in my heart, and I thought fire would be the end of my wedding. Ethan wrapped his arms around me. It was the beginning of our life. Some flames are meant to destroy. Others are meant to reveal what cannot be destroyed. And what stood between us now, stronger than pride, stronger than control, stronger than fear, was a love that had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but unbreakable.